Hello, everybody. Before we get into the goofs, and there's plenty of goofs to be had in this episode, I just want to take a moment to express my deep sadness over the tragic death of a poor teenage girl in the United Kingdom by the name of Brianna Gay, who was murdered in a hate crime recently for the crime of being transgender. The world's a little bit less bright having someone like her taken from this world so soon and over such an evil part of humanity. So as part of this, I've donated a little bit of money to the nonprofit Mermaids, which is a UK-based charity which explicitly works to help transgender children. And if you have a few bucks, recommend that you do too.
Yes, we'll have the links to that in the description. Any help helps, and this is just a tragedy.
Now in an extremely quick turn of tone.
I can break the tension, I think, because I have a prop today.
Oh, okay. That works really well in an audio medium. But
yeah. It's
like
an audio
prop.
An audio prop. You'll hear it. Here's me breaking the tension. Breaking news! We have breaking news, everyone!
Oh my goodness.
This is an emergency podcast.
Yes.
See, I have a soundboard, but I haven't figured out how it works. So
now you're just bringing in audio props.
I have a physical bell.
You've got like a bell, you've got an air horn just lying around, like you're
I don't
ready.
have an air horn, but I should.
You've got like those things you wave around that make the clicking sound.
Absolutely.
But today we are here to talk about a very serious threat to humankind. That one that has been threatening us almost since the beginning.
Yeah.
Balloons.
Balloons. How do they work?
Dangerous threat. Man's greatest enemy.
What are their weaknesses? None. They have none.
They have a vulnerability to piercing damage.
No, we had originally a different episode planned, but this has been on our radar and also on physical radar, I guess, on literal radar, for a couple weeks now. Information is changing, so we are doing an emergency episode right now about balloons and all the balloon sightings and balloon shenanigans.
Yeah.
If you haven't heard about them, there's a lot going on, a lot more than I realized was going on, and I've been trying to keep up with it.
Yeah, 538 emergency pods get screwed. This is going to be way better. But I guess before we go, this is a podcast called It's Probably Not Aliens, which is going to be one of the most literal things that we've had to do for this podcast. But basically, when you're listening to a normal non-emergency podcast, we usually talk about pseudo-history, pseudo-archaeology, and the ancient astronaut theory or UFO stuff. And we normally don't have a news beat because talking about UFOs don't come up in the news super often until this past week or so, when I guess we've been invaded by unidentified flying objects in various places across the United States and Canada.
Yeah. This is why we're doing the show, because now you and I, this is very Watchmen-esque, Tristan. You're in Canada, I'm in America, always butting heads, us two countries, but now we're united. We have a united front against these balloons.
Balloon menace.
America and Canada, best friends now against the balloon monstrosities out there.
Yes.
Yeah, originally we were going to do a Q&A episode this week, which if you missed our shout out to get some questions into us for that episode, then good news, there's still time. So if you just go to probsnotaliens.com, there's a form at the bottom where you can ask us questions. And we're going to do a Q&A episode maybe next week, but we have to get this out.
Unless another UFO-related emergency pod has to happen.
We have to get this out. We also have another already finished episode about the Phoenix Lights from 1997 that is already up on Nebula for you to listen to. So this is just going to be an emergency feed drop, and everything will be back to normal in the next week or so, and we'll be back on our regular thing. But we got to cover this. What's happening with these balloons, Tristan?
Yeah, so there's been some balloons that have been floating menacingly over parts of the United States, especially the Arctic, that have been causing airspace to get shut down for them to scramble jets to fire very expensive jets, firing very expensive missiles to take down these unidentified flying objects spotted over top of various places. I think there's 4 of them. There was one that got shot down over the Carolinas. There's one that got shot down over the Yukon Territory. One that got shot down over Lake Erie, and was it Lake Huron? Sorry, Lake Huron, and one over Alaska. So what's going on? What are these flying objects?
What are they?
Yeah, is this it? Is this the aliens? Because Giorgio Tsoukalos apparently on Twitter believes that they are.
No, he said something about it.
I'm not seeing that firsthand because I don't want to look at him. But
and we're both trying to stay off of Twitter.
Yeah, but I've been told that there's a lot of UFO people, including Giorgio, who have been like, this is it. And because UFO people have a very short memory when it comes to these falsifiable claims, this is not going to destroy his career or anything like that. But Scott, is this it? Are we having first contact right now over Tobermory, Ontario?
Maybe. Did the aliens send us balloons? Is it a celebration? Is it a threat?
It's some sort of celestial birthday that we missed out on.
We missed.
Yeah.
And this is their passive-aggressive reminder.
I'm going to get into it. So first of all, I just want to start with a disclaimer that this story is incredibly hot, and there's a lot of things that are going on, a lot of explanations for what's happening, and a lot of accusations flying around. So a lot of what we're reporting is just what people are saying, because there hasn't really been a lot of independent research, because that takes time and resources that we haven't had at the moment. So at the end of the day, I will try to make some heads or tails of what I think happened, but keep in mind that this is very early days. This is very speculative, and our only real sources to go by are basically 2 countries yelling at each other.
Yeah. And we are recording this on a Thursday. It'll come out on a Tuesday. There might be more information between those days that we may not have right now. Mm-hmm. So bear with us as we try to cover this developing story. This is like our first news.
It's true.
Sort of thing.
The UAP one came kind of close, but even then, that was like a year off.
Yeah.
So mankind has always loved his balloons, but what happens when the balloons say no more?
When the balloons have had enough, it's time for them to fight back.
So I have 2 pieces of context that we need to understand to kind of get what's going on. Mm-hmm. The first is, why are there so many balloons in the air? That's a lot of people. I think that's like the first question. Like, wow, there's
first question.
How is it that there's all of these incidents?
There's a lot. Did the old man from Up get shot out of the sky?
Oh my god! I'm back.
We'll never know.
The missile's just flying at him, and there's this pause while he has just this memory, and he's like, "I'm coming to see you again, Martha," or whatever her name is. And then just boom.
Yeah.
But the thing is that balloons have actually been part of warfare for a long time, mostly for reconnaissance. The idea that in the past, people flew balloons over battlefields in order to get the bird's eye view of things, to get information and draw battlefield maps is pretty old. It has the first recorded incident is actually as far back as the French Revolutionary Wars in the 18th century.
Oh, wow.
So yeah.
Are these like hot air balloons or?
Yeah, basically. Or because we didn't really have a lot of helium back then.
They used some hot air balloons in warfare in Avatar, The Last Airbender.
That makes sense. Firebenders can do that kind of thing. So the first one was used for intelligence collection, but also balloons in the past have been used to carry things that could catch fire, called incendiary balloons.
Oh.
Sometimes even for combat, they would have small bombs on them. That was one phenomenon that I did get some pushback in an episode recently about how the Japanese during World War II did put bombs on balloons, and there was exactly one case where some people were killed by that. So balloons with bombs on them are not an uncommon phenomenon. Balloons that are meant to be spying or meant to be spycraft or for reconnaissance have all been part of the thing.
And we've all played Bloons Tower Defense, where you have to have monkeys shoot balloons because the balloons are menacing.
This is
that game?
This is guys, I want you all to be very nice to Scott. He doesn't play a lot of video games, so he's trying very hard right now.
I'm trying really hard. You know Bloons Tower Defense? Everyone knows Bloons Tower Defense. It's a classic.
The classic. So, and another case in America is that the Civil War actually had balloons used for reconnaissance and communication, because you can put signals and stuff like that on them.
Or just shout really loud from the sky.
Yeah, just, hey, Down there!
Hey, there's some fighting happening. Yeah, I know. We're in a war. Okay, that makes sense.
I'm very vulnerable up here. In the late 19th century, military ballooning started to evolve. Technology allowed for more sophisticated balloons and equipment to get used. They started to do things like put cameras and telegraphs on the balloons that were able to give more accurate and detailed information. The peak was probably World War I. See, I don't know how much Americans learn about World War I because
not a ton.
At one point, my wife turned over and she was like, Tristan, what was World War I? Because,
I know it happened because of a drive-by, right? Franz Ferdinand assassination.
Kind of, yeah. He was assassinated by a Serbian nationalist named Gabriel Princip.
I know it had chemical warfare.
Mm-hmm. It was the first use of gas warfare against people.
Trench foot.
Yeah. Long story short,
I know bits and pieces.
Yeah. Long story short, Europe spent a lot of time developing their military technology to the point where their defensive capabilities were a lot stronger than their offensive capabilities. And when the war started, they clashed into each other, built these trench lines, and then barely moved for 4 straight years as they tried to find anything that they could develop to break that trench balance, including things like gas warfare and things like fighter planes, but also that basically the thing that broke the meta was tanks. Tanks sort of killed trench warfare. So
tanks, because I know we've talked about before that planes were pretty new.
Yes,
at the time.
Yeah, the Wright brothers
were also pretty new.
Tanks didn't exist at the beginning of the war. They were invented during the war.
Extremely new.
Yeah. Tanks didn't even show up until like the last year of the war, and it was huge. They basically broke the entire meta. But yeah, the Wright brothers was like 1912, and World War I was 1914. But also, balloons were used to track movements. Artillery played a pretty large role in World War I, and being able to accurately track where to aim those, because they could fire like kilometers away from where you fired. So you needed to have like spotters to basically point to like where they needed to go, so they could do the math to aim them.
Oh, cool.
And also just warn of early attacks. And also they could be used to transport goods and messages and people across the battlefields. It's like, hey, we need to get you over there. We're going to put you in this balloon.
Get in this balloon. It's going to be terrifying for a little bit.
It'll be fine. It'll be fine. Machine guns haven't been invented. Oh, wait. Yes, they have. Have fun. See you later. Bye.
Bye. Have fun being lifted into the sky where no human is supposed to be.
Yeah. After World War I, though, military balloons started to decline because aircraft and other sort of innovations started to make them less relevant, things like radar and such. But they still had a few little bits of purposes during warfare, specifically for training pilots, but also to do weather stuff. Because,
weather balloons.
Yeah, weather balloons. Started playing a big role in understanding like when to plan things. And as war became more of a thing of logistics and planning, then it became about like tactics and battles. Knowing things like the weather was a pretty big deal.
We needed to know when to fight the weather.
Yeah. One day we will defeat the weather. We're working on it. We're warming up the planet, and one day we will defeat weather once and for all.
Take that, weather.
Although I think weather's winning.
Yeah, sort of a backlash on us.
Yeah. And in modern times, also, balloons have fallen out of favor because of the use of drones and satellites that have taken over most of their functions. Though I will say that is changing. DARPA has looked into the possibility of using balloons to do non-line of sight communications. So basically to radio people in a way that you can't directly communicate with them. So you you relay off of these balloons.
Oh, interesting.
And also, you can communicate with aircraft that way between the ground and the air. And also they're just a lot cheaper than drones, because drones, I don't want to go too much into how drones work, but the way America makes drones, America went for the very big, very expensive drones.
Have to. Yeah, that's our thing.
Yeah.
Big and expensive. We love that here.
While like right now, we're seeing in the war in Ukraine, the extremely effective use of swarm drones, which are very cheap but plentiful drones that are just bombs in and of themselves, because those have been developed by the Iranians, who have been developing basically a way to defend themselves from an American invasion since the 1970s. So this is very tangential, but like the Iranians have a whole plan to the point where every single time the Americans do war games to try and anticipate what a fight with the Iranians would be, using their technologies, which involves like cheap self-destructing drones and basically missiles that are fired from like small boats. And those two things basically destroy the American Air and Navy. Turns out that the most expensive and the biggest isn't always the best. Either way.
No.
But balloons are a lot cheaper, and also not in the sense of military sense, but they are also coming in as a climate change based alternative for air travel. So people are thinking about like using balloons to send to travel, although a slower but a much more environmentally friendly way of traveling, especially for things like this was proposed here in Canada because Canada has a lot of remote indigenous communities that don't have roads for a good chunk of the year because part of the way to get there on car involves driving over like rivers and stuff like that while they're frozen. Oh, and those rivers are getting less reliably frozen, and people's needs for supplies seem to continue all the time.
The weather's fighting back at us.
And so sending stuff through balloons to those places is actually, a way to do that. Like, for example, we have an entire city, Iqaluit, that has like 30,000 people living in it that you actually cannot get to via highway. There is no road that gets there, which means that you end up with things like watermelons costing $30.
Oh, and yeah, so that's a lot.
Finding ways to more efficiently send things to these sort of remote locations is resulting in balloons getting another look. Maybe the Hindenburg didn't ruin it after all.
I love it. Do you think everyone will have their own personal balloon? And
we can only hope.
Balloons for days. That's what I think. Although not right now. Maybe not right now. Maybe if you have a balloon, maybe don't get in it and fly right now.
Yeah, it's not
stuff's been happening.
It's too soon there's been some balloon related tragedies. Furthermore, the other thing that's important to mention for this context of this situation is that China and America are not doing so good together.
Not best friends like America and Canada right now?
No. Which is strange because actually America and China have enjoyed decades of a rather fruitful relationship ever since the United States recognized China in the 1970s. It's actually one of the few good diplomatic moves done by Richard Nixon.
All right. Good job, Nixon?
Yeah.
That's a phrase I don't know if I would have said.
There was sort of a falling out between China and the Soviet Union, and the U.S. was like, "Hey, what if took China? Like, what if China and us became buddies?" To the point where like it's worked out really well, but that is starting to change, and it was sort of inevitably going to change because China is very quickly eclipsing the United States as the world's largest economy. It's predicted
they're going to have bigger, more expensive drones, and we can't have that.
Yeah. Well, we could talk about their relative military power. There's some interesting stuff going on there. But basically, the prediction is that by 2035, the Chinese GDP is going to surpass the American, which is when it comes to superpowers is always a problem. There's a growing challenge to American hegemony in Asia. America does have its very loyal sort of subject nations that it keeps as a bulwark against Chinese influences of things like Japan, South Korea, Taiwan. But in a lot of countries in Asia, like places like Russia and Saudi Arabia and a lot of other countries have started to shift their center of influence away from the United States and towards China. And when you have one empire waxing and the other one waning, you are inevitably going to have some sort of confrontation between those two powers. And it's going by the name of the Second Cold War.
Yeah, I could have seen that coming. All right, we got a Cold War coming.
This is a hard part to, like, some people are calling it a Second Cold War. Some people are also calling the conflict between the US and Russia as a Second Cold War, although I would say that Russia as sort of a close to Chinese ally that thinks it can act against US hegemony is sort of more of a front of this China Cold War. But either way, that's...
So is the Second Cold War happening currently, or are people projecting that it will happen?
Most people have considered that it pretty much started in the early Trump administration and has sort of been escalating since. But both America and China have been preparing for years for the when one economy was stagnating and the other one was growing immensely. It was inevitable that they would come to a clash, and so both have been preparing for decades for things like this.
They've been stockpiling their balloons.
Mm-hmm. And so that means there's a lot of like strategic competition going on. There's a lot of espionage happening. There's a lot of economic and military technological developments that are happening for and against each other. China is planning on going to the moon in the 2030s.
Okay.
If you ever wondered why America is all of a sudden so much more interested in going to the moon lately.
I was going to say, we sort of forgot about the moon there for a little bit.
Yeah.
Now we're like, moon's awesome. Remember the moon?
Yeah, ever since the Chongha program in China, ever since they were planning on building a moon base in the 2030s, then all of a sudden America is super invested in going back to the moon. There's also been a lot of stuff with semiconductors, sort of the stuff that's at the core of computers that make them work, as both are sort of fighting over strategic resources of rare earth minerals and silicon and things like that. Artificial
AI.
intelligence, like science in general, 5G, quantum computing, all of these like breakthrough technologies both countries are trying to develop as fast as possible in order to get an edge over each other in sort of a technological arms race.
The volume that they use on Mandalorian, that's for warfare, I assume. I can only assume.
Like, I mean, there was ideas that it was going to come before Trump, but the Trump administration really sort of ramped it up as America's strategic focus was more focused on Russia before then. And Trump wasn't super interested in provoking conflict with Russia, so China became the main focus of his administration's wrath, which led to a lot more competition and a breakdown of relationships. Anyways, there's been a lot of like fighting over technological development, a lot of like stuff coming up about securing supply chains. Right now, America's supply chain is very dependent on Chinese manufacturing. And
very much so.
The Biden administration is working really hard to try and develop an independent supply chain for critical stuff independent of China, which is going to be quite an ask.
Holy cow.
And so, yeah, this is just part of the context of what's going on when all of this went down, that there is a distinctive situation where two superpowers are more and more looking eye to eye at each other, realizing that, you know, there's only room for one of us in the long term. And that is leading to all sorts of like very complicated geopolitics and stuff going on. So in all of that behind the scenes context, suddenly, as we look to the sky, there's a floating thing that we're trying to... What is that? Yeah.
Is it a bird? Is it a plane? Is it Superman? No. It's a balloon.
Yeah. So
what happened?
Let's talk about the balloon. This is the first balloon was pretty big. It had this technology bay that was probably the size of 2 or 3 school buses and had 16 solar arrays on it as its payload and was probably about 61 meters long or 200 feet. Like we're looking at something that's like almost like half the size of the Statue of Liberty, like that kind of.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. This is a big ass balloon. Probably weighed about 910 kilograms or 2,000 pounds.
What? It weighed a literal ton? How did it stay in the sky?
Helium's a hell of a thing. Apparently it had propellers on it and showed that it had some abilities to steer and to move. Just because studying it, they realized that it could not... Like that, it didn't necessarily just kind of like flow with the wind. Yeah, it could. Well, it was following the wind, but it could steer.
It could move itself a little. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So they did some flybys to look at it, to give it an idea of what it could be. They flew some U-2s by it to see what it was, and they saw that it had a lot of antenna on it, which implies that it was probably something called signal intelligence gathering, which is basically putting a thing with a bunch of antennas that's designed to intercept signals and listen to communications between two different parties. It's a pretty standard part of electronics warfare.
Just hacking into those signals. Mm-hmm. Just getting them.
Yeah, intercepting, seeing what's out there. Although the main thing though is that it didn't really have enough power to do a broad spectrum listening. So we're not exactly sure what it was particularly looking for because it wouldn't have been able to. It didn't have enough power to be able to do that all the time.
Okay.
And they were able to pretty confidently figure out where it was manufactured and like how it was picked up because the People's Liberation Army does have some records of like their purchasings and stuff like that. And there's a lot of evidence that they bought the things needed to make such a thing not too long ago because and they did it through a Chinese manufacturing corporation because China is quote unquote communist. There's like private corporations that are highly integrated into their military that it's very like the line between public and private is very murky in a lot of Chinese things, because that's how their economy works.
They gotta take you ever watch that show Dexter?
Like with Michael C. Hall?
Yeah, the serial killer guy.
I watched a few seasons of that, yeah.
They gotta take a page from his book where he was like, when I go and get murder supplies, I also throw in random stuff. So like, yes, I'm gonna go get some tarp to make sure the blood doesn't get anywhere, but I'm also going to get life vests. And then no one questions me. They're going to be like, well, this guy he's not up to murdering. He has life vests. Those are for saving.
And then he puts them on Facebook Marketplace.
Yeah. And he sells he probably has like a shed full of life vests, this guy.
You're like, there's just like one person at the store who's like, how does this guy lose his like life vests like every other week?
What is he doing with these life vests?
So when it comes to balloons, what makes them very useful for this particular kind of intelligence gathering is that they are very hard to detect with radar. They have very small radar cross sections to the point where they have about the same size as like their radar like profile is about as big as a small bird. They also don't emit any infrared, which means that anything about like anti-aircraft guns or missiles or anything like that really can't target them, because infrared's often used for, targeting and homing in on aircraft.
Right.
So all of that is to say that this was a thing. The military knew about it. They were studying it to try and see what was going on. And then on February 1st,
you were saying the government already knew about it. Military already knew about it, but the first time that a civilian saw it
was February 1st. Yes. That same day, the former editor of the Billings Gazette, a guy by the name of Chase Doak, saw it above Billings, Montana. And after seeing the reports that the airspace around Billings was closed, he assumed that it was a UFO. He contacted his friend who was a photographer for the Gazette, and the two took pictures with telephoto lenses, getting some pretty decent pictures of this thing, and sent it to government agencies. The photos then got published in the Billings Gazette and got from there widespread media coverage. And this is when everybody started talking about it. This is when everyone started hearing about it. Yeah. When that happened, the US DoD and the Canadian Department of National Defense had to announce on February 2nd that NORAD, NORAD is basically like the organization that protects North American airspace. Because it's called the North American Aerospace Defense Command. So it's a joint thing between Canada and the United States that basically defends the skies above North America. So they announced on February 2nd that NORAD was aware of the balloon and that they believed that it belonged to China and had been watching it for several days. It crossed over into U.S. airspace on January 28th near the Aleutian Islands, which is near Alaska, and then moved across Alaska, entered into Canadian airspace over the Yukon and the Northwest Territories, which are two of our Arctic territories, on the 30th. It then flew southeast over BC and crossed over into the U.S. into northern Idaho on the 31st, and then into Montana on February 1st, where it was finally spotted by civilians. So they had considered shooting it down, but they decided not to because they were worried that if they had blown it up, there would be debris that might injure people on the ground.
So they were just watching and waiting.
Yeah. They were also interested in looking at it to see what its capacity was and like what kind of things, like studying what it was doing. Yeah. It was a balloon that did not look like it had weapons on it or anything like that, so they were more interested in just seeing what it was doing and what it was up to and what it was interested in.
Yeah.
The problem, though, is that when it was spotted over Montana, people started to get a little concerned because Montana is one of the places where America keeps parts of its nuclear arsenal. The Malmstrom Air Force Base is there, which also has many intercontinental ballistic missiles, the things that America has prepared to destroy the world if ever need be.
Cool.
And they were worried that the balloon might be there to, look at those when they're not supposed to.
Yeah.
And furthermore, there are other nuclear silos in nearby states. There's some in Montana, but there's also some in North Dakota. There's some in Wyoming. So they're in the area where a lot of America's nuclear arsenal is located.
Boy, we have a lot, huh?
Second most in the world.
Great.
So they then try to figure out where it was going based on some studies of weather patterns and things like that, and eventually narrowed it down to a place in Missouri, just a little bit close to Kansas City on February 3rd. It was then reported to the Washington Post that the balloon was not derelict. It generally followed the jet streams, as I said, but it did loiter when it neared some places like Air Force bases and things like that. So it was an idea that this was there was this contention between China and America because America was saying that this was a spy thing, and China was very publicly saying that this was a weather balloon that had gotten lost. But the fact that it was able to stop and maneuver near sensitive sites put some question marks onto that.
Has some steering capabilities. Yeah.
Yeah. So then it was monitored for a few hours by NORAD people using aircraft because their radar was not super useful for it. They flew an F-22 Raptor to go look at things, and they tried to use some jamming to stop it from collecting information, and they gathered a little bit more information, including something called the U-2S, which is one of America's high-altitude flying airplanes. You might remember that there's, you need a very special type of airplane to fly at, these very high altitudes because... This balloon was hovering at about 60,000 feet, which is well above where airplanes are usually. But this one can fly at about 70,000 feet or 21,000 meters. So it can actually get close enough to look at it and jam its radar capabilities. And then on January 4th, it got into the Carolinas where the FAA closed airspace over the area and temporarily had one of the largest flight restrictions in U.S. history. They made a no-fly zone that is nearly double the size of Massachusetts and bigger than the one that's around Washington, D.C.
Yeah, it was chaos. Yeah.
Yeah. When it finally got over the water, that's when they decided to go and shoot it down. And they shot it down over Surfside Beach in South Carolina. And they shot it down with, for the nerds, they shot it down with a AIM-9X Sidewinder missile that was fired from an F-22, which this is one of my favorite facts that I learned about this in the part of dealing with America. And we've talked about America's military-industrial complex weirdness in a lot of ways. That was the first time an F-22 had ever downed something.
The first time?
Yeah, the first time a F-22 had ever downed another flying thing. And it was the first time an aircraft over U.S. territory had been downed since the Second World War.
Oh my gosh.
So it was big in some weird ways.
Yeah.
And so
for sure.
And so this was the big event. This was the big thing that everyone was talking about.
This is the big thing. Everyone's talking about this balloon. Everyone's saying it's a spy. Is it it's confirmed that it was a spy?
It's not confirmed. They're just highly suspect it.
Okay.
But I'll get into a little bit later. But then we suddenly started seeing more of these. There was an object in Alaska detected less than a week later where the U.S. National Security Council basically said that this one is a lot smaller than the spy balloon, as what they called the spy balloon that they shot down. It was only about the size of a small car. It looked like when people saw it, they described it as being a cylindrical floating cylinder.
Okay.
And it was detected on February 9th, and they sent a bunch of E-3 Sentry AWAC aircraft to go look at it. And F-35s were deployed to go and make a visual inspection. And they found out that it wasn't an aircraft that had people on it. They found that it was an unmanned thing.
Another unmanned thing. Okay.
Yeah. And the people, though, what threw people off is that some unnamed people from intelligence who then contacted CNN said what they saw was an object that, quote, interfered with their sensors and was seen as a flying cylinder, which made people think this was this is getting some UFO territory, because pilots said they couldn't determine that they couldn't find any means of propulsion on it. And also told CNN that the object didn't appear to have surveillance equipment. So everyone's like, oh, so this is a floating cylinder. What is this?
It's a floating rod. Mm-hmm. It's the immovable rod from D&D.
Perfect.
Someone just left it in the sky.
Yeah. It was eventually shot down by an F-22 also which makes it the F-22's second air-to-air kill.
I was going to say, what a week for F-22s, huh?
Yeah. It turns out that they actually can launch.
That's awesome. Good for them.
The F-22 is not known for being amazing. It costs $10 billion. Keep in mind, yeah. Each one, that's the thing you have to keep in mind. Each one of these F-22s costs $10 billion. And each of those missiles is awesome. $10 million in their own right too.
Awesome.
They should just label cool. Every time they fire one of these missiles, they should just be they should just measure it in how many full ride scholarships to Harvard it costs.
Depressing.
Yeah. The object then, they blew it up and it landed in the waters in the sea off of a place called Dead Horse in the territorial waters of the United States. The Coast Guard and the FBI have been looking to find this object. But at the moment, like while people are, talking about the whole Chinese thing, there's some people who think that this is a Chinese balloon. But honestly, what they have no idea what this object is for, what its capacities were, or even who made it. So they don't know anything about it. And unfortunately, it is February, and it went down in the waters over the Arctic, which makes the recovery effort kind of complicated.
That's true.
Because in the Arctic in the wintertime, the daylight hours are very small because in the Arctic, the farther north you go, the longer nights are during the winter. So during the winter in the Arctic, in some places that's night like almost 24 hours a day for several months.
Hard to see.
But still, it's going to be difficult, and it's very cold. There's very bad weather. Worst time to be in the Arctic is probably the Arctic in February.
Yeah. Plus, The Last of Us was on, so people wanted to catch that instead of go hunt down this thing. They got better things to do.
The problem is that at the moment we don't really know what they recovered. They're sending out something to try and recover bits of this, but it's going to be a long process. And even if they do figure out what it is, because of diplomacy and stuff like that, we might not know what it is for a long time. But that doesn't matter because we got distracted quickly again, where on February 11th, when another one showed up.
Let's go, baby! Another one!
This one appeared over the Yukon Territory, which, if anyone doesn't know, the Yukon Territory is part of Canada's Arctic territories. And it is the part of Canada that borders with Alaska.
It's the part that makes the potatoes. Is that true? I don't know.
Maybe.
Are there potatoes there? What are Yukon gold potatoes? Do they come from?
They must. Like, I think that's the only place called the Yukon, so.
This is the most, I'm going to look this up. This is important. You continue with your silly balloon story.
Okay. So NORAD monitored the object for a little bit, and then Justin Trudeau pointed out that, it's time to take it down. So 2 F-22s from their joint base at Elmdorf-Richardson tried helping while actually the thing was taken down by some CF-18s, which is interesting.
Oh, so not
The F-22s helped trying to monitor and find it, but this was actually taken down by CF-18s because that was that's the airplane of the Canadian Air Force, because these were taken down by the Royal Canadian Air Force.
Gotcha.
Because it eventually crossed over into Canadian airspace, and so Canada took over.
Follow up. Yes, potatoes are from Canada. Thank you, Canada, for your potatoes.
They took it down because this object was flying at 40,000 feet, and at 40,000 feet, it is actually a risk to civilian air travel, so they didn't want to.
You don't want planes crashing into stuff.
Mm-hmm. This one was also cylindrical and was shot down on the orders of our defense minister, Minister of National Defense, Anita Anand.
Mm-hmm.
And the day after the Alaskan incident was shot down, it went down as well. But the problem, though, is that it went down over the Yukon, and currently it's being searched for by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, or the RCMP, which are basically Canada's federal police force.
Okay.
In pretty much every part of Canada that is far too rural to have its own police force, we have the RCMP.
All right.
I think there are some provinces that have their own police, like Quebec and Ontario, I know have their own police forces, but in most of the country, the RCMP are the effective police. The problem, though, is that the area is about 3,000 square kilometers in size, or 1,870 square miles, and it's a part of the country that is Arctic with a lot of snowpack and also is mountainous. So some officials are saying that it's possible that this will never be recovered. But they are currently making a search in coordination with Public Safety Canada and assistance from Yukon-based units of the Canadian Armed Forces. So
lots of big searches for these things.
Yeah. And again, hasn't been found, might never be found. But
that's the last of them, right? That's the third and final one?
I have some bad news for you.
Uh-oh.
The last one, which actually happened only 300 kilometers from me, happened near, another one was spotted near the city of Tobermory. I say city generously. Tobermory is very small. But it's about a 3-hour drive from where I live.
Well, you don't have to make Tobermory feel bad.
Tobermory is a very pretty town.
They got a lot going on right now.
Yeah. which did concern people because Tobermory is sort of close to a nuclear power plant.
Oh,
So this one was defined as being an octagonal-shaped UFO.
Okay.
It was first detected on February 11th over Montana, and then it disappeared until it was seen the next day in Wisconsin, flying very low at 20,000 feet over the Upper Peninsula of Michigan.
All right. Cool.
Go Yoopers.
Go Yoopers. I'm from Michigan, but I'm from the lower one, the one that looks like a mitten.
You're from the mitten? Okay.
I'm from the mitten.
NORAD tracked it and shot it down over Lake Huron by the orders of U.S. President Joe Biden on February 12th, using a Minnesota Air National Guard F-16. Ooh, a classic.
Classic.
The object was first looked at to be unmanned, but it led to a shutting down of the airspace over Lake Huron, and it was a part where like a reasonable amount of planes had to be grounded and stuff like that, like because it was a pretty big deal. That's why that one really made the news, because this wasn't the Yukon, this was like the Great Lakes region.
Yeah.
This one did, like many of the other ones, had no sense of self-propulsion. Apparently, just moved with the wind, and it didn't
just floating around.
It also didn't emit any communication signals.
It's just a thing in the sky.
Mm-hmm. To the point where on Valentine's Day, the White House spokesperson John Kirby pointed out that the intelligence community doesn't dismiss that this might have just been this might have actually been a weather balloon.
Yeah.
They just were on very high guard.
I'm sure we'll talk about it later, but I have my own thoughts about some of these.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So the object fell into Lake Huron, approximately 15 nautical miles from the shore of the Upper Peninsula of Lake Michigan, likely in very deep water. Again, although the weather here is fairly nice right now, it's getting colder and we've had some very windy sort of conditions. So it's been tough to find, but it's very likely that it's going to be a pretty tough project to get because Lake Huron is very big and very deep.
Yeah, some would say it's a great lake.
Mm-hmm. There's also some issues because they don't know which side of the border it might have fallen into, and it might have actually fallen into Canadian waters. So it's going to take longer because there's got to be coordination between the United States and the Canadian, lake defense or whatever, people who are going to go.
Sure. Yeah. The lifeguards. Yeah. The lifeguards are going to get it.
Yeah, they both whistled and jumped off their little platforms into the lake and are swimming 15 nautical miles out to go get it.
Yeah.
So like all these objects show up in a very short amount of time and everyone's like, what the hell is going on? What's
happening?
Things are still in motion and there's still a lot of things to follow up in the weeks to come. But the best possible theory that I have come across comes from a tech reporter by the name of Rebecca Jones, who did a tweet thread about this, basically lining up what likely happened and why we saw so many balloons in such a short time. Mm-hmm. And that is when you're doing spatial science, in the case of like studying radar and satellite data, you use technology to filter out noise that you can identify the actual objects you're looking for. She explained it as trying to find a tennis ball on a beach using a 3D scan of the beach. You know how big a tennis ball is, so you take the data from the beach and tell the computer to find a round object that is approximately the size of a tennis ball. Because otherwise it would take a lot longer to find the tennis ball if you had to sift through every small object that was on the beach and reviewed it one by one. So they ignore everything that doesn't look like a tennis ball. A lot of the stuff, the radar and satellite technology that was set up to monitor the skies of North America were designed for detecting aircraft. So we know that aircraft are a certain size. They move across how they move across space. They filter.
We've got these like filters. Yeah, we've got these filters to be like, you don't have to scan everything in the sky because there's birds, there's
Supermen, Kryptonians.
Supermen. We're looking for planes, specifically ones I would imagine that aren't, registered to be doing stuff. They're looking for like, if you find a plane, be like, all right, well, that one is actually that's just like, that's flying. That's fine. We know that plane. That's Southwest Airlines. But they're looking for others for stuff in that range and not just literally everything that's in the sky.
Yeah. NORAD is particularly focused in looking for airplanes, missiles, and Santa.
Fucking narcs. Leave Santa alone.
Yeah. So that's like the main thing, is that they're trying to look for these things. When the first balloon incident happened, NORAD was looking for more of them, so they reduced the filter sensitivity to allow smaller objects to pass through. and they're picking up more of these small, slow-moving objects that usually in the past had been filtered out. It's like if you turned off the filter on the beach and found a bunch of seashells, coins, and rings and stuff like that while looking for tennis balls. And
exactly, this is what I was gonna say. This was my thought as well. Is like, yeah, when you find the first one, then suddenly you're like, let's adjust our filters to find similar ones. And then my personal thought is they're probably just finding a bunch of sky trash.
Yeah,
I think they're just finding sky trash in the sky.
Yeah, because when they adjusted the filters to look for balloons, they found there's actually a lot of things out there because people do different parts of like research. People do things for like balloons for communication. There's all sorts of like people do balloons for spycraft. Like all of these, like there are lots of balloons out there.
We literally, and again, like because of the release schedule of this podcast, it's a little bit wonky, but in the episode, if you're listening to this on the public feed, the main feed, there will be an episode soon about the Phoenix Lights where we talked about how there was a time where someone, for no explainable reason, tied flares to balloons and sent them into the sky just because I guess because they were bored. And so, like, that stuff happens, you know? So, and, there's like people doing like science, science class experiments of just like things floating in the sky or what, personal, there's just stuff in the sky.
But there's also like more serious stuff like weather balloons that are put up to do meteorological research, specifically like also like studying places like the Arctic for like climate change research and all that kind of stuff. Furthermore, there's a lot of stuff like there are a lot of balloons used in spycraft, just like the one that was reportedly, allegedly shot down earlier. And the thing is that when they turn off the filter, they found that there's a lot of things out there. And because of the heightened sort of awareness and the nervousness, they shot down a bunch of them that looked like they were doing suspicious things or in suspicious places, like following the same path of the previous balloon or being near nuclear power plants or whatnot.
Right.
And this seems like the most likely answer to me.
I would agree. I mean, it seemed, especially with the idea of the remaining three having no form of communication really built inside of it that we could detect, or really a way to steer or do really anything. Like, it just feels like sky trash to me.
Yeah. And it all comes down to a lot of the ones that were shot down subsequently might have just been weather balloons or research balloons or whatever. But some of them might be spy equipment. China denies that the first balloon is a spy balloon, but there seems to be a decent paper trail that says otherwise. But I will also say, because I know that I've got to, I don't like taking sides too often. I will say that it's pretty goddamn rich for America to make the shocked Pikachu face over this and scare people about it, because there's high tensions with China and a lot of fear that, like, because America is an empire in decline and that there's a growing new empire in decline that is like, on the rise, that there's a lot of anxiety and tension that could lead to some dangerous situations. This happened in the UK with Germany, fear of Germany before World War I, if anyone remembers in our episode about the balloon, the Zeppelin incident over Western America, that there was a lot of that, that as Dr. McDougall said, that the British had all these stories about Germans, like fictional things, because basically what was happening is at that point, Britain was the empire in decline and Germany was the empire on the rise. And so there was a lot of anxiety in Britain over a rising German power. But making the as I said, making the shocked Pikachu face about like, how could you possibly spy on us, China, when I don't have to research to say that for 150% the US has a whole network of balloons doing the exact same thing everywhere on Earth.
Yep.
And that these things are probably a fairly common sight. And the only reason why they made such a big deal about it is because it made it into the like normie press.
It's because people saw it. It's because normal folks saw it, and that's the only thing. And which is not to say that it's nothing, right? It's not to say that it's nothing, but it's just like the only reason that people are talking about it is because
somebody saw one.
Somebody just saw it, yeah.
But like these things, like China is making these things. America, I would imagine America has like 15 times these things.
Absolutely.
That's just like out there. Like every country is doing this. This is one of the things about geopolitics that I always find very amusing, is that like every country is spying on every other country. That is just just a fact about the world. But every time one gets exposed, every country is like, oh my God, I am shocked. I cannot believe this.
A balloon to spy? That's unheard of.
What could China possibly need to worry about with American power? What? Like, anyways,
it does feel like there's a point where it almost looks like, because we're just now shooting down so many things, it does make it almost feel like there's some anxiety and some severe paranoia going on.
Yeah. Everyone's getting wound up. But the thing is, when it comes to these like heightened geopolitical situations, my guess, whenever empires clash like this, my assumption is everybody is lying. The Americans are lying, the Chinese are lying, everyone is lying, because this is a geopolitical Cold War tension situation. So they're all just posturing to try and win the story. Yeah. So as tensions between China and the US get higher, expect more and even dumber events like this to happen.
And if everyone's lying, that means that it's probably aliens.
I feel like this is one of those situations where like the aliens, they would come down to mess with us. They're like, look, we are like so afraid of ourselves. It seems like what are we going to do? Like, what are they?
Yeah. They
just need to, like, if they had any malicious intent, all they have to do is sit back and wait.
Yeah. Now look, we've talked about this before. We talked about this a couple times throughout the show. Obviously, all sorts of stuff is still evolving around this situation. And we've even talked about before about how, like, you know, if there are aliens out there, you and I will be the first ones who will be so excited about it. So we're not saying, until we get more info, though, it feels more likely that it's not. Mm-hmm. It feels more likely that it's just stuff in the sky put there by humans than aliens.
Yeah. What I will say that will be like sort of a takeaway from this whole thing is that, like, we are the first generation to have grown up without knowing the Cold War in our childhood. And in the past, in the 20th century, the people who are older than us, so probably the many dads who listen to this podcast, probably remember that during the Cold War, shit like this happened all the time, where this, like, they would catch a Russian spy or a Russian spy craft or something like that, and there'd be a big freak out over it. America would pretend like they'd never spy on the Soviets ever, and the Soviets would be like, is the weather balloon. and it would be a big it would be like an international incident where, you know, everybody is lying, and it's just part of the sort of Cold War tensions. We are just in another Cold War, and that exact same thing is happening. But for us, who, you know, us younger people who don't remember the Cold War, are going to see these as big and weird events for a while, because we weren't around to see, like, sometimes the Cold War got a lot scarier. Like, there were times when, like, the Soviets shot down an airplane and stuff like that, and it got, like, very tense. But these kinds of things will happen, especially because we're entering into a bipolar world when we spend our entire lives living under basically living under a world order where the United States was, like, undoubtedly the most powerful country on earth, and there was really nobody who could challenge them. China can challenge the United States now, and already is, in a sort of regional context. That's why, like, if you want to really think about it, that is why, like, Russia can, like, you know, like, stick its thumb up its nose or thumb its nose at the United States when it is invading or attempting to invade Ukraine right now. They wouldn't have been able to get away with that, 20 years ago. But because of the sort of changing power balance in the world, I think that they have the space to do it. This is going to be this is going to be more and more the thing. And that is going to be the new state of affairs. And to us who don't know anything except a world where America controls everything, that's going to be really scary for a while, especially because America and China both have very complacent media that will basically report anything they say without any criticism, which means that all of the news that Americans are likely to get from major news sources are going to be just 100% pro-America stuff. Same with China, and so we're never going to get a good view of the story unless you are very skeptical. So Just knowing we are entering into a new war where information and winning the narrative is going to be the big deal. And so keep in mind that every time you see a balloon story happen, it might be two countries that are trying to appear like they are the good guys in a story where there are no good guys.
Or it also could be nothing. It could just be something out of the sky that is nothing.
If you really want to know, to kind of put it all in a bow on it, there is a very great song that is literally about people seeing and misreporting on something in the sky and it leading to nuclear war, which is 99 Red Balloons. So 99 Red Balloons is like literally about misreporting balloons as nuclear warheads and it leading to an exchange between the sides of the Cold War and annihilating the whole planet.
Balloons have got it out for us.
So we're back in the Cold War
the whole time.
Cold War II, everybody. Yeah, the balloons are plotting. The 99 Red Balloons are back, and they're here
back
for revenge.
And as we talked about, there's not that this isn't a story to pay attention to, but there are also more important stories, like what we talked about at the start with Brianna Gay. Mm-hmm. Also, I don't know if you know this in the States, there's the death of Tyree Nichols as well. So there's a lot more important stories, I would say, right now to pay attention to in the moment. And like Tristan said at the start, we'll have links to charities and such in the description of this episode. You can also, if you liked this breaking news edition of Probs Not Aliens, let me get the bell again. Breaking news edition of Probs Not Aliens.
I will say that this is sort of an experiment. So if you liked this format and you wish us to do more emergency pods, that would be good feedback to get right now.
The best place to tell us at Probs Not Aliens on Twitter or all the other social media stuff we'll put in the description. Tristan, where can people find more of your stuff? I know that you've got a big video about trans rights and things like that.
I do, yes. So I have a YouTube channel called Step Back, where I talk about why the past is important for understanding the present to shape the future. And my most recent video is called There Has Always Been Trans People, and I'm very proud of it. And especially in the sort of context of the last couple weeks, I think is a very important statement to say, although I think I'll have a new video on a much dumber topic coming out very soon as well. But Scott, well, if I wanted to know whether or not I should like the HBO Max streaming show Velma, made by Mindy Kaling, where would I need to find out exactly what Scott thinks?
Log on to the internet. People are talking about it. But if you want to hear my thoughts, you can go to my YouTube channel, Nerdsync, Nerdsync, all one word. That's where I make videos. I've got a couple other smaller videos coming out like that Velma one. People seem to like me just talking to my camera without any fancy editing or anything like that. So as I'm getting set up in my new space, I'm going to just make a handful I'm going to challenge myself to make a video a week for like a month, just to force myself to get back in the habit of making videos. So hopefully we'll have stuff soon, more Scooby-Doo stuff, some Marvel stuff. People like when I did that. That's sort of what I built my channel around in the past. So if you just want to know my thoughts about things, goofing and gaffing and laughing and all that good stuff, follow me there. And thank you to everyone who listens to this show and writes reviews on Apple Podcasts and other platforms. It really does help us out. We've been growing a lot, and we want more. We'll never be satisfied. More views, more listens. I want more of it. So tell your friends. It's the best way to share the show.
Write probs.aliens.com on a BULLOON and release it into the sky.
And then if it gets shot down, that's more publicity for us. People will be like, it had a mysterious URL on it. It had this, we'll just do a QR code. People will be like, what is this alien writing? Scan it with your phone, probsnotaliens.com.
Yeah, tell your friends.
And you can get episodes a week early on Nebula.
Yeah, go to nebula.tv/probablynotaliens.
And we'll be back next week for more stuff. For finally episode 68.
Yep.
This was episode 70. We're going to hit episode 68 next week.
Yep.
It's confusing. Anyway, until then, my name is Scott Nicewander.
I'm Tristan Johnson, and the truth is out there. Probably, but definitely not on the news. I did way too much for a story about a balloon.
It was really interesting, though.